Sir, you need to pack up and leave.
I'm just reading. This is a public library.
We've had complaints. You're making people uncomfortable.
I'm seated quietly. I'm not violating any
I don't
policy.
care what you say. Stand up now.
Officer, I have a right to
Turn around. Don't make this harder.
Am I being detained? Or...
Sir, put your hands on the...
What happened inside this building would not stay contained. It would be replayed frame by frame, examined by investigators who were never meant to be involved, and attached to a paper trail that refused to disappear. No one present understood it yet, but decisions made in silence were already moving toward consequences that could not be negotiated away. By the time the evidence surfaced, explanations would no longer matter, and the institution would be forced to answer for a moment it failed to stop. Before we go any further, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing.
It's a weekday afternoon inside the Seattle Central Library. Glass walls stretch upward. Light pours across long wooden tables. The third-floor reading room is quiet enough that every page turn is audible. People work, study, and sit alone with their thoughts, exactly what the space is designed for. At one table near the windows, a man reviews legal texts, typing occasionally, highlighting passages, pausing to think. He doesn't speak to anyone. He doesn't move around the room. Nothing about him draws attention, except that someone has decided he doesn't belong. A call will be placed. An assumption will be treated as fact, and an officer will arrive already convinced he understands the situation. Within minutes, witnesses will start recording. Security cameras will quietly do the same. And a routine afternoon will begin moving toward a documented failure that no one will later be able to deny. This is a reconstructed reenactment based on a real, publicly reported case. The third floor of the Seattle Central Library is reserved for quiet study. Rows of tables sit beneath floor-to-ceiling windows. Signs remind patrons to keep voices low. People come here to disappear into their work. That Tuesday afternoon in early spring, Aaron Miles arrived just after 2 o'clock. His office was under renovation. Construction noise made concentration impossible. So he did what thousands of professionals do every week. He went to the library. Aaron was in his early 40s. He dressed plainly. Slacks, a button-down shirt, a blazer. He carried a laptop, a legal pad, and several law books borrowed from a university library. He chose a table near the windows, opened his computer, and began reviewing case law for a deposition scheduled the next morning. For nearly half an hour, nothing happened. He read. He typed. He highlighted text. He spoke to no one and bothered no one. Across the room, however, someone was watching. A senior reference librarian noticed Aaron sitting alone. She couldn't identify a rule he was breaking. He wasn't loud. He wasn't disruptive. But she decided something about him felt wrong. She mentioned it to a co-worker. "He's been up there a while," she said. "I think he's loitering." Her colleague asked if there was a problem. "No," she admitted. "He just looks suspicious." The co-worker dismissed it and returned to work. Unsatisfied, the librarian escalated the concern to her supervisor. Again, the same questions were asked. Was the man disturbing anyone? Was he violating policy? There was no clear answer, only a feeling. Building security was contacted. When a security officer arrived, he observed Aaron quietly working at the table. "He's just reading," the officer said. "This is a public library." That should have ended it. Instead, the decision was made to call the police. At 3:02 p.m., dispatch logged the complaint. A suspicious individual loitering on the third floor, making people uncomfortable. No crime was identified. No policy violation was named, but a patrol unit was sent anyway. The responding officer, Officer Daniel Hart, arrived believing the situation already required enforcement. By the time he entered the reading room, his assessment was settled. Aaron looked up to find a uniformed officer standing over his table. "You need to leave," the officer said. Aaron calmly explained that he was studying, that he had been there less than an hour, that he was a legitimate patron. The explanation was dismissed. The officer didn't review library policy. He didn't speak with security. He didn't verify the complaint. This footage would later be reviewed frame by frame. At this point, the officer believed the situation was still under control. Aaron stayed seated as the officer stood over him, arms folded, blocking the light from the windows. The room had gone quiet in a different way now. not studious, alert. "I'm not leaving," Aaron said evenly. "I'm a patron. I'm working. I'm not violating any rule." The officer didn't ask which rule applied. He didn't request identification from library management. Instead, he repeated the order. When Aaron explained that he was an attorney preparing for a deposition, the response hardened. "I don't care what you claim to be," the officer said. "You need to leave now." Aaron recognized the shift immediately. This was no longer about library policy. It was about authority being challenged, calmly, lawfully, and in public. He asked for the officer's name and badge number. The officer provided it without hesitation. Aaron then stated, clearly and without threat, that removing or arresting him without cause would violate the Fourth Amendment. That was the moment the officer chose escalation. Around them, other patrons had stopped pretending not to listen. Phones appeared above books. A woman at a nearby table spoke up, explaining she had been there for hours and that Aaron had done nothing wrong. The officer ignored her. Another patron identified himself as a retired attorney and stated there was no legal basis for removal. The officer's hand moved to his cuffs. Each refusal is now a recorded decision. Policy violations are already documented. Aaron closed his laptop slowly. He stood with his hands visible and said he was complying under protest. He spoke loudly enough for the room to hear, stating his name, his profession, and the fact that he had violated no law. By now, at least 5 people were recording. Security cameras continued to capture everything from multiple angles. The officer cuffed Aaron tightly and announced the charges: trespassing and obstruction in a public library, for sitting and reading. Witnesses protested as Aaron was led toward the elevator. No effort was made to reassess the decision. No supervisor was called. From this moment forward, every action was being preserved. The patrol car door closed with a dull thud. Inside, Aaron sat upright, hands cuffed behind his back, eyes forward. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He waited. From the driver's seat, the officer radioed in the arrest. A male suspect. Trespassing. Library complaint. Dispatch asked a follow-up question, one that hadn't been asked earlier. Did you verify the individual was actually trespassing or violating library policy? There was a pause. No, the officer replied. Library staff reported it. Another pause. Longer this time. Dispatch requested the suspect's name. Aaron gave it calmly. The radio crackled again. Stand by. Inside the library, supervisors were now involved. Security staff were being questioned. The original complaint was being reviewed, not in theory, but against policy. From this moment on, there was no version of events where this ended quietly. The officer exited the vehicle and returned inside. Through the rear window, Aaron watched the conversation unfold at the circulation desk. He saw gestures. He saw heads shake. He saw security clearly state that no violation had occurred. Minutes passed. When the officer returned, his posture had changed. The confidence was gone. The certainty had collapsed. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, unlocking the door. "You're being released." Aaron stepped out slowly. The cuffs came off, leaving visible marks around his wrists. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of error, only a release, after witnesses, recordings, and documentation had already sealed the timeline. There was no internal explanation that could undo what had already occurred. The release didn't end the case. It started it. Within hours, witness videos were circulating. Security footage from multiple angles was preserved. Statements were taken. The arrest, quiet reading, visible credentials, refusal to verify was now fixed in record. An internal affairs investigation was opened. The officer's personnel file was reviewed in full. Over 9 years on patrol, Officer Daniel Hart had accumulated 16 complaints. More than half alleged racial profiling or excessive force. Several had been sustained. Others closed without discipline. The pattern was no longer abstract when placed beside the library footage. Investigators concluded the arrest lacked probable cause. Policy was ignored. Verification was bypassed. Witness statements were dismissed. The conduct was found to be unlawful and racially biased. The department terminated the officer's employment. The decision was final. Civil litigation followed. The city was named alongside the officer for false arrest, unlawful detention, and constitutional violations. Evidence included video from 4 cameras, multiple civilian recordings, dispatch audio, and internal findings. The case did not go to trial. The city agreed to a $3.8 million settlement. No admission of wrongdoing was issued, but the terms required action. Mandatory reforms were imposed. Independent bias training. Early intervention flags for repeated complaints. Supervisor review of arrests. Public reporting of stop and search data. External oversight authority. A federal review followed, expanding beyond the single incident. The library arrest became a reference point, not because it was unique, but because it was undeniable. The officer did not return to law enforcement. The settlement was paid. Policy changes were implemented. The camera kept rolling. There was no quiet ending.